Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by Cody and Tracy, our co-hosts today. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great, Pat.
All right.
Awesome today, Pat.
It's great when Cody's doing well with a broken leg. We've got Karen and Matthew in studio today. And Tracy, what is our topic today?
Don't master your frustrations.
That's right. We want to talk today about essentially the answer to that question that people often ask, which is, hey, should I work on getting better at my frustrations and even getting really good at them? Wouldn't that be a good thing? And the answer to that is no. There's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't try to master, to be great at our frustrations. Some people would see that as, hey, I'm going to be great at all 6 of these things, but there's actually a cost and a trap associated with getting great at things that we don't enjoy and that don't give us energy. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is why we should not try to master our frustrations.
And I think this topic is super important for the world of work and even in your personal life as well, which is, boy, part of the best thing about this assessment that we have is, great, you get to identify what your working genius is, but knowing your working frustration is equally valuable, and maybe even more so for a lot of people who are in a job where they're frustrated or miserable. That's the sort of the key of unlocking what a future of more dignity, more fulfillment, more joy and energy in their work would look like. Yes, it's great to know your working genius, but this whole conversation around working frustration, I think, is really interesting because there's so many contexts where people are expecting you to do what you just described. Hey, be good at all of these things. And we fall into that trap.
That's right. So let's talk about the problems. Let's just say somebody, for whatever reason, gets really, really good at one of their frustrations, or for that matter, they get phenomenally good at one of their competencies. Why does that lead to bad things?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is it being dangerous because, especially when you're on a team, the way teams typically operate is, hey, you're good at that. Why don't you do that? And so if you become proficient or even master one of your working frustrations, let's call it galvanizing or tenacity, something like, if you're really good at pushing projects, you're not fulfilled by it, but because of your environment, you've gotten proficient at it, then the rest of your team is going to say, oh, Cody's good at that. And now it's put me in a position to do that on behalf of my team in a way that's going to only bring me misery, even though I'm relatively good at it.
Yeah, and it's going to take away from your ability to really lean into your geniuses. I mean, if you're so focused on the things that are outside of your geniuses, you have no time left over to lean into what brings you joy and energy. That's the trap.
Right. And it's funny how people assume that if you're good at something, you must like it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And because we always say, if you love something, you're going to be good at it. But similarly, people say, well, if you're good at something, you must love it. And that's going to actually keep you trapped in that environment. I mean, imagine if you were a professional basketball player and you were a great shooter and you found yourself on a team that had 2 shooters that were better than you, but you were a pretty good rebounder and they needed you to rebound for that season. You can do it. You can say, I want the team to win. And then the next season they go, okay, you're going to be our main rebounder. And you're going to go, I don't like rebounding. I think you need to trade me to another team because I was put on this earth to be a shooter. And though I can sacrifice myself for a short period of time, if I spend the rest of my career rebounding, I'm never going to do the thing I love the most and that I'm best at. And I'm going to build up resentment and frustration over time.
This happens all the time in the workplace, Pat. Like, I remember a specific email, we might have mentioned it once on this podcast, where somebody got their test results back and they said, hey, the test says I don't have tenacity. You know, I made it through medical school. How is that possible? And my response was, well, did you enjoy it? And the answer was no. But think about this, like in the context of work, you know what they put on their resume? Finished medical school, did all the necessary requirements. Like, you're actually putting yourself out there to your employer in a way that says, like, hey, I can do all these things, even though they make me miserable. And then you're sort of promoting, like, hey, if you hire me, I'll do more of those things, even though it doesn't bring me joy and energy. And then you get trapped in a situation where you're on a team or in a role where they're going to require that of you. And I love the analogy, like that basketball player is going to quit at the first chance that they get an opportunity to go shoot on a different team, like go be a shooter on a different team.
And rightly so. What he shouldn't do is go to the next team and say, well, look at my rebounding numbers. They're going to go, hey, we got ourselves a rebounder here.
Totally.
So we owe it to ourselves to do the things we love the most, which is not to say that we can't sometimes do other things, but if we do it too often, then we are going to get into that trap. Now, there's something else that will happen eventually if we let ourselves fall into that trap. And that is, I think we're going to get injured. Okay, we're going to get injured. And that is, I know people, I can count myself as one of them, and I know a lot of people who, in the course of their lives or their careers, got stuck doing something they didn't love, but because they really wanted to succeed or they wanted to be approved of, they kept doing it. And at some point, they lose their ability to do that anymore. It's almost like PTSD. They're like, please don't make me galvanize anymore. And they're like, but you're a great No, I hate it. I've been doing it for years. And then not only have they done that, but they actually are now almost, it's like they're triggered by having to galvanize. They've lost that reservoir of doing something that they don't love, which we all should have a reservoir for doing things that we don't love. But if you do it for too long, you lose that ability and you become essentially unable to live in that space. You can relate to this, right, Tracy?
Yeah, I mean, I lived my life as a T for so many years. My whole career was based on tenacity. That is where I did everything. I lived there for almost 25 years. And now when I go back to that place, it is definitely triggering. I know you can relate to this, Pat. It's like I can't even tolerate it.
And what's funny, Tracy, is T isn't even one of your frustrations. It's a working competency. And galvanizing for me is not a frustration, it's a competency. But when I get into a situation where I realize, oh crap, I'm going to have to galvanize a lot, I have an irrational aversion to that. It frustrates me because I'm like, oh no, here we go again.
And I would say your guys' stories, I actually champion this point a lot when I'm talking with teams and individuals around their working geniuses. Your guys' stories are really poignant because it's actually far more dangerous. And where what you're talking about, like an injury, tends to happen more with a working competency than it does a frustration, because people have a very low tolerance for working in their frustration. They're like, that immediately I feel frustrated. I want to get out of this right away. But in both of your cases, it was a competency that you then got praise for on your team. Like Tracy, you got recognition for being good at pushing projects through to the finish line. So, and it wasn't just like a totally distasteful thing for you for the first decade. And then I love what you're saying, Pat, like the same is true for you. Galvanizing was a competency and people look to you to do it because you were actually pretty good at it.
Wow. What's interesting, it's become a frustration now. When you overuse or over-index on your competencies, you're essentially pretending it's a genius, and eventually it becomes a frustration. So if you want to hold on to your competencies, don't be so great at them that you find yourself overusing them.
I would say that since we've released Working Genius, I've heard just as many stories of people who have had a very similar experience where they're like, hey, I'm in a job that I'm relatively good at and I've built some structure around my competencies. And so people are relying on me for only those things. And as you mentioned, Tracy, when your calendar gets full of those things or your project plate gets full of those things, you don't have time to fill up your cup by doing your working genius. So it's actually like a, subtraction by subtraction. I don't know what the right is. Like, it's not only bad for you, it's actually worse for you because you're losing time in your working genius.
Yeah.
So what is your advice? What do we tell people, especially young people? Because I'm sure a lot of young people are listening to this going, well, wow, that seems like a luxury to get to work in my working geniuses all the time. What is your advice to them?
Yeah, what we have to teach people is it's not a luxury. It's not a luxury. And don't go into a field where you need to prove yourself for 2 or 3 years doing something you hate, because all you're going to do is lock yourself into that, build up a resume around that, build up a reputation around that, and you're actually going to build up confidence in that. To be confident in your working frustrations and even overconfident in your working competencies is actually putting yourself in a position to get stuck. And so it's actually, I love this because I didn't think about this when we started, but hold on to your working geniuses and lean into those with fervor, because it will send you in the right direction. And be proud of the fact that you're not great at something that you're not meant to be great at.
I do feel like that message, Pat, because generally speaking, whether you're in school or you've gotten your first job or you're decades into your career, people tend to think, well, you should be average at all. You should be good at all these things. Like, why can't you be better at project management or calendar? Like, and so we constantly are getting a message of, why don't you be a rounded out individual that's relatively, the Great Gatsby line, like, I'm the worst of all specialists, the well-rounded man. And the truth is that you should be a specialist in the things that you're a specialist in, and aware of the things that you're not a specialist in, and lean into those. Because when you paint the wrong picture of what you're good at or how you're wired or what you're bringing to the table, people accept that picture of you and then they expect that from you. So you can get in a really dangerous place pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's not a neutral thing, it's a dangerous thing. And so guard and protect and be proud of, and not in a prideful way, but be glad that you have your geniuses, and allow yourself to live into those. Wow, I have a renewed sense of wanting everyone to know their genius and to demand of themselves that they find work that gives them an opportunity to live into that.
I love that.
I think that's the end of this podcast. All righty. Well, thanks, you guys. This is great. And I hope that people listening to this, whether you're a practitioner and teaching others about it or just thinking about it for yourself, will never apologize for having a genius. All righty. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll talk to you next time on the Working Genius Podcast. God bless.